On CXO Talks today, I have with me Jigyasa Labroo, co-founder and CEO at Slam Out Loud, a for-mission non-profit that uses the power of performance and visual arts to build creative confidence in children from disadvantaged communities. What had me spellbound was the fact that India ranks 99 among 139 countries in the Global Creativity Index. And in our conversation today, we talk about how creative spaces boost innovation and how social impact entrepreneurs can be truly intentional about measuring impact. Let's hear what this CXO talks. Hi, Jigyasa. First of all, thank you for flying all the way from Dharamshala to Delhi and coming to Wine Studio for the episode with CXO Talks here.
You're welcome. Hi.
I'm sure it has been an exciting day for you and tiring as well. But I tell you this thing that, this very weekend I was running the marathon, and it, of course, is very taxing because the time that you start early morning and then going on until next 2-3 hours running and walking and trying to just complete it. One thing that really struck to me while my moment of epiphany was the fact that I could just equate how what I'm doing right now as an entrepreneur just seemed so similar to how a marathon is. And I remember that, when we had a conversation early on, this is something that you also voiced. So, how do you feel that entrepreneurship and running a marathon is actually similar in many ways?
I think so. I've never run a marathon, but I've seen a lot of people run it. I read this fantastic book from Haruki Murakami a couple of years ago, which was What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. A beautiful book. I thought it would inspire me to run. I cannot run because I have a mental block, which is where are we going to? Do you run and reach somewhere? No, you just come back. And then I'm like, actually, marathon to, running to as a physical activity is not my thing. Lekin, I think, as we spoke in the conversation, I see marathons as experiences where you commit to doing something which is not short, to doing something long term. And how I see entrepreneurship comparing to a marathon is seeing it as a process of creating something which is enduring, seeing it as a process of something which is long term. And hence, when you're running a marathon, you take care of your well-being. You realize that you're not going to run for a short distance and then stop. And you got to fuel yourself in whatever ways your body, your mind, your creativity needs fuel. And similarly, if entrepreneurship is a path you're on and you want to create something which is built to last, you got to take care of yourself.
I think that's very true because if I recall, because I ran the marathon with my team, and I remember that the week before that, or rather few days before the D-Day, before the day we began running, one thing that we were doing is loading on the carbs, hydrating ourselves. So just like you said, entrepreneurship, the journey itself and the goal is so enduring that you take care of yourself. You work towards it, and it's not short term, it's long term. And this also brings me to a fact that you are running Slam Out Loud, which is a venture in the impact space. And running a venture in the impact space, which is very mission-led, yet non-profit, has its own, has its own toil, has its own tumultuous challenges, yet the vision is so enduring that you continue at it. How did you start with building Slam Out Loud? Where did the journey begin for you?
That's a long answer, longish answer. I think I'm also just taking off from the marathon itself, the question. Like sometimes um, enterprises do not need marathons. So, for example, especially if you're looking at the impact space or looking at solving a problem, sometimes like the mission does get accomplished in a small time. So, let's say if eradicating polio was an organization's mission and it was like a sprint, it got over quickly. Like I think entrepreneurs make that decision whether their enterprises are to be run like marathons or sprints. And when Slam Out Loud started, it kind of started on its own. I did not have like any of these thoughts ki enduring organization banana hai, marathon ho raha hai. I was a Teach for India fellow, so I taught in a low-income classroom. And I think those 2 years really brought me face-to-face with questions of power, privilege. I taught in a community that was underserved. And most of my children came from backgrounds where you could predict life outcomes for them. But the stories that I saw in my children were not stories that would take hope away, were not disempowering stories. They were stories that made me hopeful, that made me see truth and beauty, that made me believe in potential. And I myself grew up with a lot of exposure to art and artistic opportunities. So I learned how to dance, I learned music, I learned painting as a child. And those were transformative experiences for me when I was growing up. So naturally, when I became a teacher, it became imperative for me to bring in those magical elements into my own classroom. So I brought in a lot of poetry, theatre, music into my own classroom. And I saw how powerful that was for my own children. I saw children who had never raised their own hands in the class suddenly raising their hands. Children who never asked questions were asking questions, developing a sense of identity. Children were finding a place where they were successful, because sometimes academics, which is how we judge most of our children, is not the playground every child is successful in. And so I saw my children experiencing that. And yet it seemed like, this thing I'm doing in my classroom, it has a name because we had to do an event, which is Slam Out Loud, is a passion project. And I never thought of turning it into an organization until I went to Kashmir for the first time. And we talked about this. My family is originally from Kashmir, but I never grew up there. My parents belonged to the community of Kashmiri Pandits, so persecuted, had to leave, and some really traumatic history there. So the first time I went to Kashmir was as a 22-year-old. I was at TFI and I was interning with the government of Kashmir. And one of the things I felt like I could contribute, or a gift that I held, was the gift of, spoken word poetry workshops for children. So I was in this classroom, about 40 girls, and we were doing a poetry activity, which is, where I had asked these girls to pick an emotion, and then I took them through a small structure to write a small poem on that emotion. And about 35 children in that class out of 40 ended up writing about emotions of anger, confusion, sadness, hate, feelings of isolation. And I did not have a response to that as a teacher. And I think Slam Out Loud as an organization was really a response to that, to the question of how might our children, no matter what kind of backgrounds they come from, have safe spaces where they can talk about how they feel, have safe spaces for creative expression, creative output. And there's so much research all over the world that proves how arts is one of the most powerful ways for children to think about how they feel, to express how they feel. And yet, we live in a country which deprioritizes the arts so much. Our ratio of our teachers' number of students in Delhi is 1:1600. Less than 20 hours of art-based learning for children who go to our government schools, which are children who might most need such spaces. And I did not know of other people doing this. And I felt compelled to do it myself. And that's how Slam Out Loud started.
And when you said about how your experience in Kashmir, while you had these kids really express whatever they were feeling, even if the emotions weren't very pleasant, but that outlet in itself is where the process of healing begins. and that is what made me feel very profound, and just a sense of fulfillment that you must be deriving out of this is what I could imagine. Tell me this, while you're working towards giving kids this creative outlet through arts in education, and education in itself is a very vast space, yet arts is something that you said that is not the focus at any point in time, especially in our country. And I also read that on the Global Creative Index, India is rated very, very low amongst the 139 countries that are there. What really entails this kind of an index? What is included in such an index? And what is it that you are doing that is contributing to upping our rank in the country, amongst many countries?
Yes. So when you think of like the global definitions of creativity, it means having original ideas. And what we build at Slam Out Loud is called creative confidence. So everybody has the ability to have original ideas. Everybody has the ability to be creative. But how many of us have that courage to put out our original work into the world? And what will it take to empower our children, to create spaces for our children where we can say, you created something on your own and here's a space to put it out. Like how many times do we give our kids those opportunities, right? Think about the kind of content kids consume. Kids consume content which is created by other adults, and kids never have an opportunity to see what their peers are creating. Kids never have an opportunity to put out their original creations into the world. So if creativity means being able to think and come up with original ideas, these original ideas are not just about what they create in a storytelling class or a poetry class or a theatre class with Slam Out Loud, but these are also original ideas when they're thinking about life situations, which is being able to resolve conflicts without violence, being able to create an ecosystem of support around themselves. And I believe that when it comes to something like the Global Creativity Index, which is about being able to come up with original ideas, if our children find more, and this is slightly poetic here, but if our children are able to find more open doors and windows, and spaces to, let's say, weave their words into stories, into metaphors, into poems, they will know what it means to create. And once they're able to do that, I think if they take a psychometric test, which is about creativity, they will surely do better. Now we live in a country where our youth dividend is so high, where we have such great amounts of like jugaad and creativity happening at one level. And yet most of our country is in a space where we're struggling with employment, we're struggling with still being in an education which is focused on rote learning. And I believe like when these spaces to be creative are provided to children early on, we'll not wait for them to be creative for the first time when they become entrepreneurs. They'll be creative from the first time they set foot in a classroom.
And while you say that, since you mentioned that how high we are as a country on jugaad, it also reminds me that India on the Global Innovation Index stands at around 42, while on the Global Creativity Index we stand at 99. So that's kind of very starking for me, because if there is creativity, thus there is innovation, yet to be not able to foster creative spaces and allow for creativity to really come to surface and be organized and structured aren't there. And if that is what you're doing, I think that's a really humongous task you're setting on yourself too, and that's amazing. And something that I'm reminded of again is how you talk about Creative Index and Tom Kelly, who's one of the foremost people talking on design thinking.
He came up with creative confidence. Yeah.
And he talks a lot about creative confidence, and he says that is actually your ability to change the world around you. And that's how I see Slam Out Loud functioning and really creating these spaces for kids. Tell me this, as a non-profit, a lot of people that I know, a lot of entrepreneurs who are in the impact space that I know have many challenges. Right from the fact that when you are put to parallels with other ventures which are for profit, the kind of scale that investors, the kind of scale that donors look for isn't something that a non-profit can provide, is my perception of it. But help me see a different perspective from a challenges point of view that you see. Is it just the scale that you want to create, or is it something else actually?
Yeah. I can start with like scale being a choice, and mostly being a difficult choice for nonprofits. So I think when it comes to like for profits, the idea of success is much simpler, right? It is the idea of what the user feels like and revenue, and it's very, very clear whether things are working or not. When we talk about impact in the social space and solving wicked problems, which are societal problems, we're looking at something which is much more complex in nature. And the decision on whether this is a nonprofit that's working out or not is a fairly harder decision. And hence, a lot of nonprofits decide to stay small, to, let's say, focus on just 100 children and work with them in depth, track how their lives are changing. However, there are also a lot of nonprofits that work at much larger scales than for-profits. You see a lot of nonprofits in education that work in India. And when we think of for-profits in education in India, right now we're thinking of a Byju's, we're thinking of an Academy. But you think about like Pratham Education Foundation, the number of children that a Pratham reaches out to is far more than Byju's or an academy. And Pratham is a non-profit. And that happens because of things like government adoption, right? Working with the government. There is no bigger player in the ecosystem currently than the government. So non-profits are poised to work with stakeholders that are large scale. And even for Slam Out Loud, like the way we see us working, is not creating a parallel system, but being able to tie our work in with the government and thus be able to reach scale without having to build organizational infrastructure. So for Slam Out Loud, the organization doesn't need to become too big to impact a lot of children. We're a small organization, but we're able to impact a lot of children because we partner with governments, we partner with other nonprofits. And that is why we're a nonprofit. We're not a for-profit because our goal is not revenue. It's about impact. It's about building creative confidence. And in that process, we don't see partners as competitors. We see partners as mediums for us to scale. So that's how I feel about scale when it comes to, comparing the nonprofit and for-profit ecosystem and our decision to be a nonprofit. Now coming to the challenges of nonprofits also comes from there, and there's again a comparison when people invest in for-profit. So one big one is nonprofits need a lot of investment in teams, in people, in organizational growth. But a lot of funding that nonprofits are often able to raise is about funding small projects, small programs. People don't want to pay salaries of people who work in nonprofits. That's a consistent issue. There's a constant benchmarking where we see that people who are really talented and who might get paid 5 times or 10 times in the for-profit space take that pay cut and come into the nonprofit space for feeling fulfillment, for doing something they're passionate about. But it is often driven by a fundamentality which does not invest into organizations and people. And as a disclaimer, Slam Out Loud is really, really lucky in terms of that. All our funders really trust our work and invest in us and our organization's growth. So I think that's one big challenge in itself when it comes to how people look at funding nonprofits. I think the second big challenge for nonprofits, especially which is true for Slam Out Loud, is our job is not just solving the problem, which is our children not having safe spaces for expression, developing social-emotional learning, developing 21st century skills. Our job is not just solving the problem. Our job is advocating to say this is a problem, because we're still stuck in a system where we're only looking at outcomes of employment and academic attainment for our children. And anything that's sort of beyond that realm is seen as a good to have and not a must have. But if you think about children who might have the greatest academic abilities but might not know how to work with their emotions, might not know how to resolve conflicts without violence, might not have a sense of agency in their lives, I do not think just academic ability can take you to a lot of places. And especially if we're talking about the most marginalized children who need those skills to break that cycle of negative outcomes that they're in.
Yeah, and coming from the background that they do, I completely understand that the kind of skills that they need to be taught and they need to be, evolved into is very different. You talked about these challenges, yet one thing that also came to me while you mentioned about investing into teams and getting the right people and how people actually move from their very well cushy for-profit jobs to non-profit for a sense of fulfillment. How has your experience been, Jigyasa, when it comes to getting the kind of volunteers and the kind of people that you've involved into the project and with Slam Out Loud? How has your experience been, and what did you do to be able to pull in those kind of stakeholders into your ecosystem that other nonprofits and impact entrepreneurs can learn from while they listen to this conversation on CXO Talks?
So whether somebody learns from this or not is on them. I can just share our experience. And whether these are words of wisdom or not are also not something I can take a guarantee on. I think one huge part of building SOL and being at SOL for me is joy. And I think that joy is palpable. I think that joy is something everybody who associates with Slam Out Loud is able to connect to. There's also, we're very, like as an organization, a lot of people say they're very customer obsessed. And for us, it's our users, our children, and we're obsessed about our children. But we're also obsessed about our team. I've always thought of wanting to work with friends and try to build a culture or try to build a team where people come and become friends with each other. And sometimes I'm the one struggling the most to, have a balance, let's say, responsibility and accountability with love and care. But I see us growing into a team that really raises each other up, that really lifts each other. And I think that's one of the things that has allowed us to attract amazing volunteers, amazing artists, amazing people who want to be a part of a community of like-minded people who want to work towards something that seems bigger than them. I think the second part has been our kids. Our children have gone on to beautiful platforms, gone on to stages and spoken their truth to power, spoken about things that they care about. Every time I see any kid on a stage, and whether it is a kid in a classroom performing to, their friends, or in a small group sharing their poem for the first time, or someone like Supriya, who a couple of years ago was in Finland. She was on a stage, she shared her poem, she did a workshop for educators and children and teachers, school leaders, politicians from all over the world on spoken word poetry. And that made me feel like this is why I do it. And I think a lot of people on our team and those who work with Slam Out Loud feel like this is why we do it. Because we know that when we see a child on a stage, and if that is for the first time, we know their life is going to change from that moment. We know it's not going to stay the same. Kuch to life-changing ho gaya. And we all want to create those life-changing moments for ourselves and everybody else. And मेरे लिए एक बहुत important life-changing moment है, and everybody on our team has one of those moments. So everybody has their own story of, कि this is something a child said or a child did that makes them do what they do. And so there's this National Youth Poetry Slam which was happening in Bangalore. I move my hands a lot. and our kids were invited to perform there, and they got invited because we wrote to them, and we wrote to them that don't invite our kids because they come from low income communities, because they're poor. Invite our kids because they're amazing poets, they're talented, and they have some really amazing, cool things from their lived experience to say. And so we went to the airport, arrange ho gaya, they called us. Children who had never been outside of their own community also in Delhi were now going to take a flight from Delhi to Bangalore for the first time, reached the airport like 4 or 5 hours early, window shopping ka concept bachcho ko bataya, their mind was blown. But finally, these were 12 children, and we were in a plane, and so now the plane starts moving, so plane moving, tick, 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 tick. And
Turbulence.
suddenly all the kids, all 12 kids are sitting like this with, holding the seats. And then the plane takes off, and all 12 of them like collectively go like, and like my eyes welled up in that moment of that, and every single time I think of that moment, I'm reminded of it was really them taking flight. They went to Bangalore, they totally rocked it, and their life after that event changed. And this is possible for all our children. These were not children who were already, who already came in with writing poetry, etc. These were all children who had stories. All children have stories. And if we can create space for them to share it, all our children can take off.
Yeah, and while you were sharing this, my eyes were welling up because that's a very beautiful moment and a very transformational moment in those 12 lives. But I also know that you've impacted over 70,000 lives offline and about 5 million plus globally. So that's how the impact is scaling. Yet, I feel that there's a lot that a non-profit can learn from the perspective of measuring such impact. Uh, what are your thoughts on being intentional about measuring impact, and how can non-profits and impact entrepreneurs really be very intentional about measuring impact as well as the financial impact?
Absolutely. Like I was sharing earlier, in a for-profit, like measure of success is fairly simple: stakeholder satisfaction, revenue. In a non-profit, social impact. What does it mean? What does it mean even for an organization becomes really, really important to define. So again, if you want to create a non-profit that creates solid impact, if you want to create a non-profit that becomes an endearing organization that other people can also learn from, being intentional about impact is not, again, a good to have. It is a must have, and it is a question that should be held on to from day one. Having said that, like staying with the problem is another part of like deciding what is even important to measure. So for us, I think the beginning 2 years were really about what does this problem even look like of children not having social emotional skills, and how does it impact children, and staying with that, talking to children, talking to other stakeholders gave us really strong insights into why it is not happening. And based on that, we were able to decide that for Slam Out Loud, we want to build creative confidence. And for us, it means a set of 6 skills that we defined, created measures to seeing how our children are growing in these 6 skills, took some international scales. And now we're in a place, and now I think our monitoring evaluation is in a much solid space where we say that creative confidence as an organization is our North Star. This is what we will measure. This is what all our programming will be around, and this is what we'll not budge from. And similarly, I think for impact organizations, actually for any organizations, measuring the deep impact of their work is and should be a priority. So being able to define what are those 2 or 3 things that as an organization you will deeply impact and measure and invest money and time into are incredibly important.
And you started out in 2018 with Slam Out Loud.
Yes.
So 2020 onwards, when the pandemic came into the picture, from all the impact happening offline to now this disruption coming because thanks to the pandemic, what were the measures that you took to be able to, in a very agile way, still continue creating impact?
Yeah. Especially when it comes to online ways of reaching children, I'm slightly wary of the word impact because we're still trying to figure how deeply impactful online interventions are, and what does it even mean for online interventions to create life changing impact. And we know that, so even in the online programs that we did, we know that our children grow in 4 of the 6 creative confidence skills, and 2 of them were collaboration and empathy, which are difficult to assess when children are not working in groups. So all other 4 skills, which are creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, self-esteem, empathy, critical thinking, whatever, 6, we have 6 skills, and we saw our children growing at least in 4 of them when we were doing online programs. And we were able to reach millions of children because we partnered with governments and they were using tools like WhatsApp to reach children. And so I feel like what is really true when you use mediums which are online is the access itself is game changing. So think about a child who might have never in their dreams, a child, let's say, sitting in Darbanga, suddenly goes online and does a course on theater. That access defines so many possibilities that we might not be in a position to deeply measure the impact of, because as an organization we took a bet that we work with these 75,000 children in person, and we create world-class resources that we feel are excellent, that we see that are working with these children, and then we put them as seeds into the world. We say that these are open source and anybody can pick them and use them. So we've heard stories where children did those online courses and sent us materials, sent us theater skits they had done with their friends, etc., and we saw how powerful that was. How life-changing that is something I don't have an answer to. And I'm okay with that ambiguity. I'm okay with not having an answer to that because some products we create with an intention of measuring कि long term में से बच्चों में क्या बदलाव आया, and some products we create with the intention of how can this access itself be a game changer for a child. And that's what happened to us in COVID. So 2017 we registered. I joined full time in 2018, and COVID came on fairly early for our organization. Matlab fairly early in the sense that we weren't like a 10-year-old organization, and then COVID came. So we were still like finding our feet, and we had already started creating digital curriculum though. We'd already started creating videos, lesson plans, guidelines, because we always wanted what we are creating to be useful for someone else who wanted to use it and should not be limited by our bandwidth and our infrastructure. So we wanted to create open source products that other people could use. And COVID put us into a position where we did not have an option but to use that. And we started with, sending children art-based activities on WhatsApp, which was one WhatsApp message a day, which was about a mindfulness activity, and through arts, children getting some sort of like creative output even during COVID. And we had more than 130 organizations that took up those activities and took our curriculum and spread it into their children. And we had them across 19 countries where organizations just reached out, said, we want to use your curriculum, and we were like, here it is. And then they spread it. And we don't know where they are with that now. And I'm okay with that.
Yet that is an indicator of how powerful collaborations are. And if that also means at certain point you have to let go of the obsession with measuring that impact, you have to. Tell me something about how you as an entrepreneur, as a CXO, while we've talked about how nonprofits face the kind of challenges that they do, what have been some times when you as an entrepreneur and as a CXO have felt pushed against the wall?
So many times every day. Um, I think this entrepreneur life is a very challenging life, not for the faint-hearted. I did not choose this life; it chose me. But um, if I had to think of a couple of challenges that I face on an almost daily basis, one is, of course, convincing everybody uh, that arts is beautiful, it is important. Our children need visual and performing arts to develop the skills they need to develop. And especially convincing them of that as a woman and as a young person. When Slam Out Loud started, I was much, much younger, inexperienced. The only experience I had was that of being a teacher in a government school just for 2 years. And I did not have, of course, I did not come from a place of high authority or high credibility. And I feel the same thing that we do for our children, which is not create space for their voices, I felt that the same was done for me. Like, I did not feel that I was given a lot of space to share my own voice, because these were circles which were controlled by people who were much, much more experienced and often like not open to as many ideas. That was a big one. I think I'm also pretty small in stature, so I'm a small person. So I look even younger than I am, unfortunately, really unfortunately. So when I walk into spaces where I need to do like partnerships with governments and partnerships at higher scales, I feel like I'm often doubted because I'm a woman and I'm a small woman. So that's another big challenge. I think I've had questions. We were raising money, and I've had questions where I've been asked, what happens to Slam Out Loud if you get married and have children? And my co-founder, who is male, was not asked the same question. That has happened. I'm the main fundraiser on our team, and I think during COVID, we did a big fundraiser whose strategy I led. Once the fundraiser was done, most people reached out to my co-founder to ask the strategy for fundraising, because people associate men and money. So that I think, and that's only like continuing to my point of how women are not taken seriously and younger women are not taken even more seriously. And if you're small, then you're dead. Small young woman, so the biases creep in quite a bit. The other challenge is I did not start Slam Out Loud after 10 years of work ex. I started it with 2 years of work ex of being a teacher. And I myself do not have a lot of answers. I myself don't come from a big sense of experiencing what it means to lead teams. I'm learning as this grows, and I'm trying my best to improve myself to be a better leader. But there's an expectation associated with the leader, and not wrongly. It's a journey which is a hard journey. The only experience I have is of my own failures and how I stumble and raise myself. But it is also an opportunity to redefine what leadership can look like, and to think of it differently. So I do see the pro of being an inexperienced founder there, not carrying a lot of baggage, but there are also a lot of cons of being someone who doesn't know how things run and tries to figure them out on the way.
And I admire your sheer honesty and authenticity on this particular aspect, because a lot of times, despite us knowing that this is what possibly is where we might face a pitfall, we're not willing to accept. And that's something that I see is very candid and very beautiful about you, because you see that age comes into the picture. You see that your co-founder, who's often not asked the same questions as you are, but you choose to live and deal with it by accepting and acknowledging it and not ignoring it and putting it under the carpet. And as I say this, because I'm a woman myself and running a venture, I know what you experience. I feel what you experience. And The good part about being a leader is that while we accept and acknowledge this, we also are authentically putting it out to our teams, and that's what they see in us. So, kudos to that journey of building the team while being very honest about who you are and where you are. That helps you lead with authenticity. And while all these challenges came through, is the non-profit journey, because there's a lot of compassion involved. You're not doing it, money is not the motivator here, right? Revenue is not the North Star metric that you are leading with. You are looking at impact. So there's, of course, a lot of compassion that comes into the picture. With that, is burnout real in non-profits with impact entrepreneurs?
Burnout is so real. Burnout is realer than ever, I think, in nonprofits. Because everybody that I know who works in the nonprofit space feels the urgency of their work in their bones. We know that for every week of classes that a child misses, or every time a child during the lockdown did not have access to internet, we know that their life outcomes got impacted. We know that so many people who were just on the brink of coming out of poverty, the pandemic put them back there. And so people who work in the social impact space see the reality of what it means to live on the margins so much, that the work, rightly so, seems so urgent and hence put so much pressure on you. And often that pressure can lead to people putting in way more hours than their body would allow, putting in so much stress on themselves, putting in unrealistic expectations of themselves and their teams. And hence, I've seen a lot of burnout around me within the nonprofit sector. And I've felt that while there is so much joy and possibility and potential in the work we do, and especially for those of us who work with children, because that's an area I'm familiar with, we see so many stories of hope. That sense of urgency can often lead to burnout. I think, like, if we went back to the question that we started with, which is looking at one's journey in the impact space as not a journey which is a sprint but a marathon, if India will not change in the next 5 years. And if we're out there to really change how this country feels, lives, breathes like, we're staking our lives for it. It's the work of a lifetime. And if we're doing the work of a lifetime, we cannot allow ourselves to burn out. Or if I had to put it differently, I would say we need to create more nourishing spaces for ourselves, where we can contribute to this work with joy, we can contribute to this work with wholesomeness, we can contribute to this work while being in harmony with ourselves. Because just 5 years of non-stop work is not going to make a dent. It will take our lives, and for that our lives need to be not burnt out.
Yeah. And how do you create a nourishing space for yourself?
How do I create nourishing space for myself? I nourish myself with a lot of good food. But apart from that, I'm in the art space. I'm really grateful that the work I do is so inherently something that is creative, is joyful. I get to think of a lot of ideas and execute them, which is one of my favorite things about being an entrepreneur. Like the gap between, the emergence of an idea or an aha moment to the execution is very little. And it's increasing slightly as our team is growing and more variables are coming into play. But I love that part. And within this part, like creating spaces for joy and connection, we huddle with our team, we play games, we come together, we deeply share our stories, we deeply share about our lives, we make friends at work. I play music, I sing, I read, I work out sometimes. but I go on a walk almost every day. I keep in touch with friends. I live with family. I live in the mountains. I live at my home in Dharamshala where I grew up. Although I'm traveling so much, yet I think I stay in a place which keeps me grounded, and I think all of these things are very nourishing to me. I think especially being surrounded by a team, friends, family, who share so much of themselves and their love so openly and without restraint, that really nourishes me.
And that's what nourishes you. But if you were to also suggest other entrepreneurs who are in the impact space some ways, some mindful ways that they can create a nourishing ritual for themselves, give me 3 nourishing rituals that they can create for themselves.
All the rituals should come from a space of, we're also a person outside being an entrepreneur. So some nourishing rituals that can exist are calendaring time for thinking. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are their work is a lot about like doing, and even for work, like action and reflection need to be balanced. Are we creating time in our calendars to think? Even if it means thinking about organizational strategy or new ideas, are we creating time to think? So, creating those intentional spaces for reflection is one nourishing way to grow both yourself and to grow the organization as well. I think it has the ROI on creating time to think is very, very high. So, that's one. I think the second nourishing ritual can be seeing our teammates, seeing people we work with as people and potential friends, and investing time and energy in getting to know them, their stories better. It's said that you cannot hate someone once you know their story, and I think ways of working get better. Having good relationships at work nourishes your inner being, nourishes the work also. That would be a second one. And the third would be really listening to our bodies, taking care of our bodies, and whether that means, whatever that means for different people, better food, better exercise, not being punishing to ourselves, our bodies, and giving some sort of, I've used the word joy and joyful so much, but some sort of joyful outlets, dancing, trekking, taking a nap when you need to, being kind to our bodies, and really treating them as the place where we house all these amazing ideas and energy, and really treating it like something that is powerful and a life source.
Uh, with the first point that you said, I remember very recently in a session that I was attending at IIM Bangalore, one of the professors said, block yourself for yourself in your calendar VIP time. That's basically me time when I think, when I don't do anything, I don't look into my mobile, I don't look at my mails, I don't respond to calls. It's me time. And use it for thinking, use it for things that help you really nourish yourself, like you said. Yeah, very, very beautiful, powerful, nourishing rituals that you've shared, which I'm sure we're going to cut into a reel and share it with our audience. Now is the time, which is the last segment of the CXO Talks, which basically is our CXO ritual, which is our CXO Talks ritual, where we ask you the question that the last CXO left for the next CXO. And the question that I have for you is from Shreyasi Singh, who is the CEO and co-founder at Harappa Education. So the question that she has for you is, what is the smartest habit that you have included in the way you work in the last 1 year? She's big on habits, and so are you. So yes.
I have a couple of smart habits, so I'm choosing one. So there's something called the Pareto's principle, which is 20% of the inputs lead to 80% of the results. And I try to design my days, my months, my weeks based on this principle, thinking about what is that one thing or what is something where I will focus most of my input on so that I can create maximum output. And I try to locate those things, those 20% elements in every single day when I start my work day, thinking about like what is this thing that I will give most of my energy to so that everything else becomes simpler and I'm able to prioritize and do something which is the most impactful. And I think that's become a habit in the last 1 year. And I've found that to be very, very effective to separate the noise from the deep work that I want to be able to do.
Interesting. And I think that while I've read so much about Pareto principle, I have not been able to consistently build that into my personal space. Yes, professionally, I do look at what is giving the most, ROI, so to say. But that's something that I'm going to take back from this conversation. And I am very confident that people who will be watching and listening to this episode on CXO Talks will also have this as a takeaway, apart from many others. And now I am going to ask you the question that you would want to leave for the next CXO.
Yes, my question for the next CXO. I was thinking about a couple of questions. But one question which is very, very dear to me is a question about what one is willing to suffer to build something. And so my question to the next CXO would be to build the organization of your dreams, to build an enduring organization. What are you willing to suffer through?
Wow. Wow. And you know what, Jigyasa, with every question that every CXO in this show leaves, that is a question that I also reflect on. So that's a very, very powerful question. And thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being here today on CXO Talks, because the conversation that we've had has been very enriching, not only from the perspective of, from the lens of impact entrepreneurs, but also for an entrepreneur and a CXO like me. So there's been a lot of phenomenal learning that I've come through with this conversation. And thank you again from flying all the way from Dharamshala for this conversation, because it truly means a lot.
Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. I enjoyed myself.